Champions, how are we? Today we've got a digital piano, a Yamaha P-95. There's reports of it having dead keys, so let's find out which ones. There we go, C sharp. Bit of a rattly key there as well. I think maybe the felt's fallen off, the little rubber on the hammer. Bit of a distortion there. Might be something loose inside. Possibly missing screws, but we'll find out. The thing's a bit creaky and groany. Like maybe someone's taken it apart and put it back together not correctly. That can also be debris on the speaker cone, and just a clean can sort that out. Another dead key, and the C sharp again. So often you'll find the same keys will be dead throughout because they share traces, so you can see there. So they're on different boards, but these are on the same board. That's the sensors. So there's a set, I believe, in this model of three circuit boards which make up the sensors, and they're wired together with ribbon cable, and they share common connections throughout, but on the same board there'll be the same trace going to each key with a diode dropper arrangement, which basically assigns a voltage to each note, and then when the microcontroller picks up that voltage, it knows that you're pressing that key. Another one, C sharp again. So we'll take it apart and we'll have a look at those sensor boards. And Yamaha are really good for parts. So this being a current, I think it's a current model still, P-95. The parts will be available. Yamaha stock absolute tons of parts, even for like 20-year-old units, and the shipping's reasonably quick. The cost is like they're about $30 for a sensor board, so well worth doing. The biggest cost with these things is just the time required to get into them and reassemble them afterwards. So you're talking probably an hour to take it apart and diagnose it, and then probably an hour and a half to repair it and put it back together. That's like minimum. So any extra troubleshooting required while the thing's apart, the costs blow out to like $300-400, and that's just for basic repair, just because the amount of screws in the thing. All of these keys need to be removed. They come off in little banks, as you'll see later. But very time consuming, these units, so generally it's only practical to repair units that cost like $800-900 plus when they were new. Anything like Casios or any of the low end sort of student or school keyboard units, generally they're sort of throw out, which sucks, or give them to one of those repair communities, that kind of thing. Everything's low voltage, so it's safe to work on. It might be something that the local, right to repair movement or whatever might be interested in repairing and then just donating. So who knows? Reach out to your local community if you are a handyman type that likes repairing stuff. If you're confident you can do it properly, it might be worthwhile. Okay, so that's a worry. I just flipped the thing over and heard a bit of debris moving around. You can hear something's loose in there. Sounds rather small, so it could be just, hear that? Sounds like a rain stick. And you can see all the crap that's come out of it when I flipped it over onto the mats. They were clean before I put the keyboard down, so they collect everything. It's like a computer keyboard. The amount of crap that ends up down between those keys, the gaps are relatively small, but you get some pretty gross stuff. I had one about probably just over a year ago, and someone had spilt a milkshake on it. A McDonald's thick shake. So yeah, I've never gagged and almost thrown up while working on something before, but I came close with that one. So now, like every keyboard or every quality keyboard, we've got the dance of 1,000 screws. Most of them are the same type, but if there are any different lengths, you got to be careful to keep them apart and remember where they went. Now it looks like there's no missing screws and no reamed over heads. So I'm actually, on second thoughts, pretty certain that no one's been in here before, because almost every time someone's been into a keyboard, there's missing screws, there's screws in the wrong place, there's reamed heads. It's just one of those things. No one can seem to get their head around the fact that the same screw's got to go back in the same hole. Well, not the same screw, but the same type of screw's got to go back in the same hole. But in this case, it looks like it's straight from the factory, so that crap I heard rolling around inside, it's probably just contamination that's made its way in through the keys. Now you can use a drill, just got to be gentle. Make sure it's actually in the screw head. I'd be confident to tell people use a drill to undo them, but do them up by hand with a screwdriver. You get more of a feel of where the thread starts when you're doing up a screw, particularly in plastic. This is a single start thread, it's like a self tapper but with the tip cut off. So that's a plastic screw where the hole's already cast in the plastic. So you got to sit it in and actually turn it counterclockwise, and then you hear that little thunk, little thud. That's it actually falling off the end of the thread. So now you know you're ready to start the thread. There should be no resistance. You should be able to do it up with 2 fingers. If it requires you to get on the end of that thing with your fist, then you've cross-threaded it and you're going to destroy the casting. So there, literally, the amount of effort that it takes with 2 fingers shouldn't take any more than that. If it does, you've done something wrong and you've got to stop and reassess what you're doing and go again. Almost every bit of equipment that people have been in here before with a plastic casing has had the holes reamed out of it, and there's not a lot you can do, because usually there's like a post that's hollow, and if that cracks or breaks off, you can try and re-glue it, but there's just not enough surface area there, and basically you can just forget about that screw ever doing any work again. So I've got the long bit here on my impact driver. That's not magnetic. And it's a good idea for some of these deep holes where the screws are housed deep within the plastic. It's a bit hard to get in there, so just grab a neodymium magnet, neodymium, and just wipe it, come in at an angle, and just get the bit magnetized. It will lose it over time, particularly in an impact. Shock actually makes magnets lose their magnetism. And now for the deep holes, you can get in there, she comes out on the tip. Right, so we've removed all the screws, securing the bottom casing. Next we'll take this plate off, and that gives us access to the ribbon cables that connect the key sensors to the main board, which is mounted on this back. Some models have this access panel, others you've actually got to take the thing apart and just carefully disconnect it before you fully remove the 2 casings from each other. On this particular one, you remove this plate. You can see the ribbon connectors in there. They've got a little bit of fibre tape securing them. And they've got little flexible ribbon connectors, cables. So they're just press fit, so just carefully remove them. Just wrap that tape around so it doesn't stick on anything. We should be good to remove this back. Just on this model, I know we're sweet, but just have a look through and just check there's no other cables connecting, just as a good habit, because different models from different manufacturers have different procedures for dismantling them. Right, so we're in. So now what we'll do is we'll go through, and there's a series of screws in this area. Got to get down between the hammers, whatever you want to call them, and just remove those screws. They're longer ones, and just when you put them in, some of the screw holes look the same, but you can see where there's a bit of a depression from where the screw head has been. So there'll be like 1, 2, 3 holes that pretty much look the same from the bottom, but there's only one screw used in that one there. But you can see where the screw head used to be, and the other ones don't have that depression around where the screw head has slightly compressed the plastic in that area. So you can, during reassembly, you can look down and at a glance you can see where the screws go. Now, because I've magnetised this screwdriver, it's sticking to all the hammers, which is fun as well. Right, so we've removed that row of screws. Now we've just got to remove this bracket. It'll come out with the keys, but at the moment it's holding the top casing on. That's the last 2 screws. We'll flip her over. Flip the unit over. Oh, there we go. A little bit quicker than expected. Put that aside. You can see all the progressively more crap coming out. Oh, look at all the shit on the mats. There always seems to be almost every keyboard I find glitter in it. I don't know what the deal is there. So now we've got to go through and remove all of these in banks. So they're castings, like plastic molds that are all connected at the top, and they're sandwiched together. So generally for one bank there'll be 3 plastic pieces. There'll be the black keys, which are usually in a bank there, and then there'll be 2 sets sandwiched on top of each other of the white keys. So we've got to go through and remove all of them, and just for ease of reassembly, as we remove them, we'll put them over on another bench in their same order, and we'll prepare to clean them. I'll ask the customer if they want these removed and cleaned. Sometimes they put these on when, say, their kid is learning, and then as they get better they want them removed, but all the sticky crap stays there. I'm wondering if maybe this one here, they started to remove one, realised that all the crap stays on there and just sort of left them on, so we can go through and clean that with alcohol and remove it with the proper solvent. So it won't affect the keys, but we'll remove all the schmoo from the board. There's a bit of yellowing there. That's partially the plastic. That's I believe it's a bromine in the plastic, which is a fire retardant added to the plastic to stop it from sustaining a flame if it catches fire. And over time that leaches to the surface and creates the sort of yellow hue to the plastic. You see that on really old computers, like the old CRT monitors. They all went yellow. Oh, that, and back in the CRT days everyone smoked at their desk. So as we take these screws out, we'll just put them in another container. I don't store like every screw in its own compartment or anything crazy like that, like some other guys do, but I'll tend to have a different container for each stage. Like, say, I'll have one container for taking the chassis out, and then I'll have another container for the screws that I remove when I take out the circuit board or whatever. And then I'll put them in order, and then I'll know that I'll work my way back. And you'll generally, if you do it in stages, the same way you were thinking about taking it apart is generally the same way I'll think about putting it back together. Unless the thing's been sitting there for 6 months waiting for parts, or quote approval, and then all bets are off. So I'm going to take all the keys off. Some techs, even fellow techs, sort of have a go at me for sort of going above and beyond what's actually wrong with the unit to check the whole thing. There's sort of two types of those guys. One of them's like, oh, you should be charging heaps more for doing all that work, or the other type is, oh, you're ripping the customer off because you're not just fixing what's wrong. Well, it's called preventative maintenance. It's, if you see stuff that's sketchy, at least give the customer the chance to say yes or no to fixing it. Don't just ignore it and put it back together, which a lot of these other techs do. And that's probably why they're cheaper, but at the end of the day, if something goes wrong, the customer's going to be on your front door going, well, you didn't fix it. Because they don't care if it's a problem with this board instead of that board. They just care that the thing isn't working as it should. So I'll go a little bit above and beyond just so the thing's reliable, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all after. So these keys, you just lift the back a bit, black one off. And then just lift them forwards. So they've got a little hook that goes under. Oh, that is gross. They've got a little hook that goes under that little hole there, and that's on these plastic little holdings down here. So you can see there, they sort of lock in. They allow a little bit of lateral movement. So this is pretty gross. I'm considering getting the gloves on for this one. Oh. The problem is there's a staple there. It's conductive, that's not great. The problem is that you can't really expect the customer... Oh, give me a minute. This is pretty gag worthy, eh? You can't really expect the customer to do all this to clean it. I mean, compressed air and stuff sort of works, but it doesn't get right in there. Oh, I haven't got the strongest stomach today either. I haven't had breakfast. You know when you get that queasy, so hungry that you're sick feeling? I've got that now, and I'm doing this. So all the keys are removed. I'll just give you a close up. So this is one of the more dirty ones I've seen. Well, it doesn't beat the one with the thick shake spilt down it, but it's still pretty gross. All the shmoo. So it's amazing that all these boards aren't fucked, because that crap sits there. If there's a bit of moisture in the air, it absorbs it and then it starts corroding. So we can see, looks like a little contamination in those pins, but generally the other thing to note of these two is, because this board is the one with dead keys, doesn't necessarily mean the fault's on this board. Because they link from one to the other, there could be a broken trace somewhere on those traces that links back to that board that is making it seem like that board's failing when it's actually this one. So what we're going to have to do is give the thing a vacuum. It's a bit of a shit because you can't see the grease. The grease just makes all the shit stick to it, and you can't vacuum it off, or you end up with crap all over your vacuum. It doesn't really remove it. Real bad ones are blasted with compressed air, but it goes everywhere, so you really need to do that outside, and it ends up all over the inside of the thing, so you sort of have to mask it and then blast it to get the crap off, and then re-lube it, and yeah, that's time consuming as well. So what I'll do, I'll remove the rubber boots. That's these things here. You can see the sensors underneath are protected sort of like that, so they're relatively clean. And it's not very often it's actually that the conductive little
tactile sensors there. Usually it's the traces because they're unprotected. They're protected by a bit of solder mask, but that's it. And the corrosion, all it takes is a little imperfection in the solder mask or the contamination to enter near a pad where there is no solder mask. And those traces are super tiny, so it just eats through them. Sometimes you can repair the traces, but I found that's only sort of temporary, even with conformal coat. I've done that a few times and it's always come back, so I just gone screw it and replace the board. And hasn't come back after that. So for $30 a board, it's worth it for the peace of mind. So we've got the vacuum out, we'll get it angry and we'll vacuum up the excessive shmoo. So we'll take off all the little rubber tactile booty things. I'm not sure what the technical terminology of them is. So they've got little arrows on them and they point up towards the, I guess, away from where the keys are pointing. They just pull out. They've got like little legs on them that go into the hole, compress, and keep it attached to the sensor boards. So we'll put them aside. We'll give them all. So we'll put them aside. We'll give them all a clean. Some mild detergent. Right. So as I suspected, there's actually no problem with this board over to the right, which is where the problem keys are located. It's on the center board, which is where the ribbon connectors piss off to. So this pin here and this pin here is supposed to be connected. Now both of them look a bit corroded, and there's a bit of solder mask missing. So I'm touching pad to pad. I'll zoom in for you. So pad to pad, no continuity. But if I scratch a little bit of corrosion away next to the pad, to the trace that disappears from the pad, now we've got continuity. So there's a break between that trace and that pad right there. And this pad, it shows a little bit of corrosion on the top side as well. But there is continuity to the ribbon connector. So we've got 1, 2 pads that are a bit suspect and look corroded. That probably is a candidate for repair rather than replacement, being that it's right next to the pad and there's no widespread corrosion. It only seems to be like those 2 spots. So let's have a closer look at the rest of the board. There is a bit of corrosion down on the other one as well. So I am tempted to just replace them for a couple of bucks. What I might do is I'll flick them a quote for the full, well, probably the full set. This right hand one looks okay. So maybe just the center and this one. And see what they say, because we know that'll fix it. Righto, so I've got the pricing on the new set of the full new set as well as the individual boards. I'll fired a quote off to the customer, so we'll just wait and see what they say. And in the meantime, I've got to stash this somewhere, which is a bit of a pain in the ass as well. I've got a trolley, but it's not long enough to take the whole thing. So, don't know. It's another thing with keyboards you've got to consider. While you're waiting for approval on the quote, you've got to store it somewhere, and you've got to keep the keys in order, because you're not going to go ahead and clean them if they don't go ahead with the quote, are you? So that's another thing to consider if you're thinking about repairing these things. I'm almost thinking maybe I should start doing a flat rate for the Yamaha keyboards, because they all typically have the same problem, and then just inflate it a little bit, so you win some, you lose some, but it averages out to say 3 or 4 hours labour, maybe 2 or 3 hours labour, and just quote that when people bring it in. So if it comes in under that, happy days. If it's a little bit over, well, you make it up on the other ones. I might think about doing that in the future, unless something's dramatically wrong with it, or something other than dead keys. That's probably the way to go in the future, just to save having to stash it away and wait for emails to go back and forth and blah blah blah. One other thing I've got to say about Yamaha is, particularly with this model, the service manual is a friggin' work of art. Like, you should download it just to look at it. It's beautiful. In this field, although you don't read the how to remove this screw, having a company that backs their product that much to basically invest that much money into writing such a beautiful in-depth service manual, and the illustrations are gorgeous, everything's so clear and concise, really shows the philosophy behind the company is something that is worth supporting. Right, so I've stacked all the parts up there in the corner, everything's out of the way, put the casing there, all the keys stacked up. I put a bit of paper in between just so the grease doesn't get everywhere, all the screws in their different stages of disassembly, and the little rubber boots, the contact, conductive rubber tactile actuator thingies. And we'll wait to hear back from the customer and carry on once we get the go-ahead, if we get the go-ahead. And I'll vacuum up all the schmoo that came out of this thing. Joy.